I have been told many times that when I speak, I silence the crowd, but I'm very happy to see such a crowd today at this very special lecture. My name is Andreas Kengilaris. I am Dean of the College of Engineering. And before I start with the program, I would like to share some thoughts with you that I will keep to within 2 to 3 minutes. Antoinette, I promise. So several months ago, Professor Burton and Professor Chan and I think Michael Tweedale was there as well, came to my office and they made me an offer I could not refuse. And the offer has a name. They were talking about their initiative funded by the Illinois Program for Research in the Humanities called Recovering Prairie Futures, Midwestern Innovation, and Interdisciplinary Digital Developments. And the program was design, conversation on campus. And I'll tell you, the reason why it was, you can ask Anita, I said, okay, where do I sign up? The reason why I did that is very simple. Because in the back of my mind, what they were telling me, the way it was registering was, look, our old ways are changing. And you know whose words I'm borrowing when I'm saying that. And if we cannot get on the new way, we should get out of the new way. And the only way to get on the new way is to lend a hand, because the times, they are changing. And so I was thinking about it, and I said, okay, yes, the times are changing. I believe in it. Everybody else believes in it. The challenge for the changing times is not to our students, it's to the faculty. And unless we come together and think about what these changing times call for, in terms of the way we think about what the students that come to us with the expectation to become Illinois graduates expect from us, unless we think seriously about it, beyond the selfishness of the research we do, because we are very good at doing interdisciplinary research on this campus, and take that culture and make sure it propagates down through the entire way that we educate students on this campus, we are not going to be part of the new way. We are going to stay on the old aging way. And with that in mind, I want to thank you all for helping us launch this Design Dialogue speaker series with a very important, very influential voice that found its roots here in Urbana-Champaign. But before we go there, I would like to remind everybody that we are part of a very special building today. We are in the NCSA auditorium, and the NCSA stands out for many of the things that this campus makes possible. Everything grows in Urbana-Champaign, we know that, but you need these places like NCSA to make amazing things grow. So I would like to introduce the director of NCSA, Professor Ed Seidel. Professor Seidel is distinguished researcher in high-performance computing and relativity and astrophysics. He spans the universe with an outstanding track record as an administrator. In addition to leading NCSA, he is also a founder professor in the Department of Physics, which is in the College of Engineering. We're very proud of that. And a professor in the Department of Astronomy, which is in the LAS College, which is very important to keep in mind. His previous leadership roles include serving as the Senior Vice President for Research and Innovation at the Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology in Moscow, directing the Office of Cyber Infrastructure, and serving as Assistant Director for Mathematical and Physical Sciences at the U.S. National Science Foundation, and leading the Center for Computing and Technology at Louisiana State University. He also led the Numerical Relativity Group at the Max Planck Institute for Gravitational Physics. This is the Albert Einstein Institute in Germany. And before that, he was a senior research scientist leading the Numerical Relativity Group at NCSA. And earlier this year, he behaved like a baby when he saw the gravitational wave proof demonstrated on TV, duplicating simulations that he was part of as a student here. Ed is a fellow of the American Physical Society and of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, as well as a member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and the Society for Industrial and Applied Mathematics. His research has been recognized by a number of awards, including the 2006 IEEE Sidney Fernbach Award, the 2001 Gordon Bell Prize, and the 1998 Heinz Billing Award. He earned a bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics from the College of William and Mary, a master's degree in physics from the University of Pennsylvania in 1983, and a doctorate in relativistic astrophysics at Yale University in 1988. Please help me welcome Professor Ed Seidel, Director of NCSA.
Thanks. Thanks, Andreas. So we have a cascade of introductions. The lecture will start, I hope, before noon today. So the reason this is so unusual is that this lecture today is sponsored by multiple groups, and that because it's so important to the university. So we're really looking forward to this. And I wanted to say this is also part of the NCSA Colloquium series, which we're very happy to be sponsoring. And I'll just put in a plug for next week's colloquium by Will Barley on interdisciplinary research. He's been studying NCSA to see how we do and don't do things, and perhaps I think that might be a very valuable lecture for all of us, not only those at NCSA, so I'd invite you to come back for that. So another sponsor of this, not only NCSA, is the IPRH, the Institute for Research in the Humanities that Antoinette Burton is the director of, and she's one of leads one of the institutes that also reports to the Vice Chancellor for Research. So we work together very well across the institutes of the University of Illinois. I'll just say a few words about Antoinette. She's an historian of 19th and 20th century Britain and its empire, with a specialty in colonial India and an ongoing interest in Australasia and in Africa. She's the director of the Illinois Program for Research in the Humanities, the PI of a Mellon grant called Humanities Without Walls, and from 2010 to 11 was a Guggenheim Fellow. She's written many articles and books on topics ranging from feminism to colonialism and the relationship of the empire to the nation and the world. So I'll stop there and let Antoinette come and then do the real introduction for the speakers. So thank you.
Yeah, maybe by noon. So thank you very much, Andreas and Ed, for opening up this event. And I wanted to shed a little bit more light on the institutional and intellectual frameworks through which we find ourselves coming together today for this kickoff event in the Design Dialogues lecture series. As the director of the Illinois Program for Research in the Humanities, which is effectively our humanities center on campus, I say our collective lecture series proudly, as I am very happy to have the chance to share this podium with my colleagues from Northrop Green, and especially to continue the partnership of IPRH with the College of Engineering and NCSA that my predecessor, Diane Harris, started last year over a number of events, including the appearance on campus of the engineer-poet Richard Blanco. This kind of startling combination interdisciplinary work is not uncommon at Illinois. Indeed, it is arguably our institutional signature. But in these times especially, making sure that communities and audiences at many scales understand and appreciate how entangled the sciences, engineering, the humanities, technology, and the arts are and must be, has huge stakes at Illinois and in the wider worlds in which we work. These entanglements are not mere abstractions. At Illinois, we live and breathe them every day. They are made visible not primarily by administrative cooperation, although that is key, but by the hard work of faculty and graduate students, scholars, and researchers as well, the boots on the ground, as it were. So it gives me great pleasure in the first instance to acknowledge that this lecture series was the brainchild of Professor Anita Chan, whose IPRH research cluster, Recovering Prairie Futures, was the acorn whence the mighty oak of the Design Dialogues project has sprung. Anita is Assistant Professor of Communication and of Media and Cinema Studies, a cross-college appointment that explains a lot about her intellectual origins and scholarly commitments. The charge of the IPRH research clusters is to bring faculty and students together around projects at the very start of their intellectual lives. Scholars may organize to test a proposition collectively that they've already begun to explore individually, or a cluster might arise from months or years of collaboration in order to realize an exhibit, a book project, a media platform. Though modest, the level of support that the funds provide creates an opportunity for work in common, and ideally serves as seed money for future funding. In short, our initiative at the IPRH is intended as a way to nurture collaborative faculty development, to help scholars from any discipline to think alongside colleagues old and new in order to generate new knowledge, experiment with novel forms of expression, or illuminate unlooked-for pathways through an existing problem. In this case, Anita's cluster, Recovering Prairie Futures, proposed a cross-disciplinary exploration into the Midwest's layered innovation histories, those that have often been overshadowed by innovation narratives focused on dominant regions and centers of computing, whether like academic sites like MIT or Stanford, or regions like Silicon Valley and Massachusetts Route 128. This research collaboration adopts a distinctive approach to innovation studies by looking elsewhere other than dominant engineering centers to shed light on interdisciplinary digital developments in the Midwest in its past, from precision agriculture and rural big data processing to educational and public computing and electroacoustical design. Those that necessarily bridged expertise from social sciences, natural sciences, engineering, and humanities, and that have frequently been overlooked even as they have played roles in reshaping disciplinary imaginaries, global markets, and ecologies. Professor Balsamo's talk and the lecture series that it inaugurates is just one of several outcomes of this work, which, thanks to Anita's tireless efforts, has modeled precisely the kind of intellectual and scholarly cross-campus connection that we prize so highly at Illinois, which is somewhat rarely driven, on this scale anyway, by humanists. As well, and in the spirit of the research cluster itself, Anita has used her funds and her time this year to win support from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in the amount of $100,000 via our Humanities Without Walls project to extend the work of Prairie Futures into a multi-year project that will enable collaboration across broader Midwest consortiums of institutions. Anita's vision and ambition embodies the kind of research-driven, collaborative impulses we love to nurture at Illinois. She and her colleagues are, in fact, the best kind of Prairie Futures thinking that we could ask for. I could go on and on about Anita, from whom I learn so much every day, but for now, please join me in thanking her for all her hard work and inspiration. Anita, come up. Okay, are you ready? Ann Balsamo has been recently appointed as the inaugural dean of the School of Arts, Technology, and Emerging Communication at the University of Texas, Dallas. A-Tech is a brand new interdisciplinary college hosting faculty and researchers from engineering, computer science, fine arts, and humanities. For one more month, she will serve as the dean of the School of Media Studies at the New School for Public Engagement in New York City. As has been mentioned, she's a graduate of the Institute for Communications Research here at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And her interest in the interdisciplinary linkages between technology and culture has informed her work as a scholar, researcher, designer, and entrepreneur. She is a national leader in media, technology, and design studies who has developed university-based programs blending cultural studies, digital humanities, and interactive media. As a faculty member at the University of Southern California, she directed the Collaborative Design Lab within the Interactive Media Division. She has been a leader in the growth of digital humanities nationally, serving on the advisory board of Haystack, the Humanities, Arts, Science, and Technology Advanced Collaboratory since its foundation in 2003. At the celebrated Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, PARC, she held the position of principal scientist and was a member of RED, an interdisciplinary research design group that built an exhibit on the future of reading based on PARC Lab prototypes. In 2003, she co-founded Anomi Labs, Inc., a Silicon Valley technology design and fabrication company that builds cultural technologies. Her most recent book, Designing Culture, The Technological Imagination at Work, examines the relationship between culture and technological innovation with a focus on the role of the humanities in that technological innovation. Her current work investigates the design of digital memorials and the cultural implications of public interactives as an emergent media form. The title of her talk is in the Design Dialogue's inaugural lecture, Designing Culture, Creating Multidisciplinary Collaboration. Please join me, finally, in welcoming Professor Antoinette.
Thank you, Antoinette. Thank you. Okay. I think we're going to swap over. So thank you, Dean. Oh boy, Congelaris. I will practice that. And Ed Seidel, I know you were here, and thank you again. So you're good, and so good to meet you, and Antoinette Burton for that lovely introduction. And there are a few other people I'd also like to thank. I have to thank the supernova known as Donna Cox. Truly a supernova. She and I have known each other for many years and have been traveling companions in different domains, but have always crossed over with enthusiasm. And then I too have to thank what we also know as the force of nature, known as Anita Chan. She is somebody else I've known in a kind of more recent, recent paths, crossing paths. And then I'd also like to thank Veronica Paredes, who is here as well, who you are so lucky to have as a postdoc, because I've worked with Veronica for probably a decade. I don't know where you are, Veronica, but there you okay. I've worked way in the back with her for a decade at 3 institutions and was so delighted when she was able to get her postdoc here. I just feel like she came home. I'm always delighted to come back to my alma mater, and I visit at least once a year. You guys can't get rid of me. I keep going away and coming back, because I often say this is where I grew up intellectually. Obviously, I came here early on as a newly minted undergraduate, finally getting my PhD after bouncing around a couple programs here, ending up in the most wonderful Institute for Communication Research, under the guidance of Paula Treichler, who's in the audience, who was my dissertation director. And as I know, I was her first PhD student. So there is a way in which these friendships and professional networks that get literally grown in the richness that is the Illinois kind of climate. It spans disciplines, domains, and now the world. Everywhere I go, I meet somebody who has either been literally grown here or employed here or has spent a significant amount of time here. So the intellectual community that kind of resonates and vibrates here kind of literally spreads out across the world, such that I often call it the Illinois diaspora, in a good way, right? Today I'm going to present a kind of a part of the Designing Culture project, which is a transmedia project, which means that it does its intellectual work across modalities. The book was actually the last piece put in place. It's also a museum exhibit, kind of a very kind of rich website, an interactive documentary. I mean, there are many parts to this project called Designing Culture. And consequently, there are different pathways that I could take to kind of open it up. I could talk about the work of a book in a digital age, like why, if this whole thing was about the technological imagination, why did I bother to write a Dead Tree project? And we can talk about why I think that books may outlive a lot of in fact, they are outliving a lot of my digital projects. But really the path I want to take today works between talking about the technological imagination at work and the university as a site of technological innovation. And things I'm going to talk about, I was interested, I had a chance to read the Design Center mission and the prospectus from, I think it was dated August of 2015, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about designing, about multidisciplinarity, about collaboration practices, about collaborating across differences, and present an institutional experiment that I'm kind of on the threshold of taking on. So before I get started, let me just offer a definition of the technological imagination. This is the thing that really animates my thinking, kind of theoretical work throughout the book and the project, as well as the kind of institutional work I do. For me, the technological imagination, here's how I define it. This is the capacity of mind that enables people to think with technology, to take what is known, to transform it into what is possible. When people exercise their technological imaginations, they engage the matter of the world to actually create the conditions for future world making. And then this is where it gets, I think, my kind of humanities implications or my humanities influence will come in. This imagination, I think, asks not only what can be done technologically, but equally importantly, what should be done to serve the cultures that we will inhabit in the future. And you'll hear, for the humanists in the room, that the resonance with C. Wright Mills and the sociological imagination and the work that was done in the 1950s. So with that kind of notion, my thinking and my interest in the technological imagination, imagine my delight reading these passages from the prospectus for the new design center. I mean, it couldn't be more on point, and it couldn't be more needed right now in its aspirations for connecting physical, biological, and the kind of broad range of disciplines across and that define this university, as well as its aspirations to blend the physical and the virtual, the digital and the material. I have seen some of the plans for the building as a point of convergence. It's amazing. It's going to be a kind of centerpiece for the university in the South Campus. There are already many kind of centerpieces in the North Campus. But it's really, I can't say enough about how much I've been kind of enjoying learning more about it. So given that that also was a frame for my thinking in these remarks, here's how I'm going to move forward. I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of where I really learned about multidisciplinary design, having been trained as a humanist here. And even though the ICR has its own kind of, it is a mongrel place. I mean, it is and has always been an interdisciplinary place, but interdisciplinarity kind of across the social sciences and the humanities. It wasn't until I went to Xerox PARC as a researcher who had already had tenure that I really understood what it meant to collaborate across kind of multiple disciplines. I had gotten tenure as a young faculty member at Georgia Institute of Technology, where I was teaching courses in science, technology, and culture, science, technology, and gender, science, technology, and race, so things that came out of my early research that was done here. I was actually brought to PARC to do something a little different, to bring my interest in how one studies the cultural implications of emerging technologies to a place that's pretty notorious for not always grasping the implications of the stuff that works, that kind of gets created in their labs. So I was part of a group called RED at PARC, in which I understood, and this is where I started the Designing Culture project, to think about designing culture in theory as well as practice. There were 5 labs, I won't go into all of them, and RED stood outside of the lab structure. We answered directly to the chief scientist, who at the time was John Seeley Brown, and it included a number of people. This is the names in red. And this was a multidisciplinary research group who were assembled by people who were in these different labs, pulled together into RED. And they had backgrounds in engineering, architecture, computer science. I brought the expertise in mass communications, cultural theory. Mary Beth Back was a sound designer. Dale McDonald had an MFA in lighting design. Other people had graphic design, product design, game design, new media studies. I was the humanist and brought a critical theory perspective. So among these 8 people, we had a kind of a really broad range of backgrounds: mechanical engineering, systems integration, chip designers. I mean, people had, because they were already, mid-career researchers, had been at PARC 10, 15 years. They were already quite accomplished in doing interdisciplinary work. The way in which we understood our work was that we were drawing on our backgrounds that really covered what at the time we were calling the 4 creative disciplines: art, science, design, and engineering. And what we learned throughout the project of doing research together was that there are actually very clear distinctions about things like art and design, or art and engineering, science and engineering, and so on, that although these may be kind of creative, kind of synergistic kind of disciplines, that in fact there are interesting ways in which they diverge. So my role was to bring a humanities perspective to this. And in a really kind of magic moment that will probably never happen again in my lifetime, I was recruited to join the research group at PARC again, precisely to bring something I had been trained to do as a humanist, which is understand how one looks at the conditions of emergence of a new technology, of a new media form, of a new social formation, to imagine what its longer-term implications to be, so that you could intervene, perhaps, in the conditions to help those, the technology, the media, and so on, serve more liberatory, creative, kind of, humane ends. So I brought the kind of humanities to this group, which is not to say that we didn't have a lot of shared kind of overlaps in terms of human-computer interaction, art history, and so on. But that was my role. There are a number of research questions that we addressed, but I won't, kind of go in on these. But one of them, among the ones that we addressed were, how do technologies, emergent technologies, acquire meaning over time? What kind of stories are created to help people who are not kind of the technology, initial technology users? What kind of stories are told to help people understand the meaning of the technology, not only at the moment, but the meaning of the technology on down the road? I left Xerox PARC, and I'm going to talk on this, not actually under conditions of our own making. The whole group of us was, after the dot-com bust, all of Red was laid off, along with 60 other colleagues at PARC, so we didn't leave kicking and screaming, but we also weren't able to continue our work there. But that was okay. By that time, the group had really gelled. We understood that there was something very special about the work we were doing. And that's when a group of us ended up kind of spinning out and starting a company called Antoinette Labs, where our tagline was building cultural technologies, or technologies that matter culturally, or starting our design process by taking culture seriously. One of the projects I started in Antoinette Labs, but it clearly wasn't a commercial project. It was something that actually belonged more firmly in the humanities and digital cultural heritage, was a project called AIDS Quilt Touch. It's a project that I've been now working on for almost 12 years. And the reason I've been working on it is, although we incubated it when we were at PARC and then worked on it while we were building Antoinette Labs, it was a project that was not going to get funding through typical means, right? There were not kind of corporate sponsors that were going to fund it. And at the time when we left PARC, which was 2002, neither the NSF nor the NEH were really poised to put money into something that was so much about cultural heritage, but absolutely focused on building digital experiences to disseminate cultural heritage. So the point of AIDS Quilt Touch from the very beginning was to create digital experiences to augment and extend the kind of understanding and the importance of the AIDS memorial quilt. And again, I won't go into the details. I have a whole nother talk about the lessons learned through creating the AIDS Quilt Touch program, or the project. But we did and proposed 3 different digital experiences. One was an interactive timeline, that kind of presented the history of HIV/AIDS and the pandemic, and then also the development of the quilt. The second one was a handheld application, which is what we call AIDS Quilt Touch, that enabled people for the first time to search for the quilt panels by name, and enabled people to leave memorial or commemoration statements tied to different individual panels. So it was the first opportunity to create a digital guest book in and around the 48,000 panels that make up the quilt. And then finally, the third thing that we built was an interactive quilt browser. And this was the thing that actually gave us the most difficulty, but was something that was incredibly motivated coming out of the kind of the humanities and so on. And the motivation here was that we wanted to make a facsimile or a virtual AIDS quilt, because the physical AIDS quilt itself is very fragile. So this is what we've done. We've created an interactive tabletop display. We've created the virtual AIDS quilt. And immediately upon prototyping this, we ran into all sorts of problems, and mainly the problem of visual processing an image that is 25 gigapixels. Each block of the quilt is 3 feet by 6 feet. They're stitched into blocks. They're 12 feet by 12 feet. Our images are of these blocks at 12 feet. If the image were printed out, it would cover 1.3 million square feet. So this is a very large image that we would want to process in an easy way for people to understand it. Anyway, what happened was this, through the intervention of the National Endowment for the Humanities Office of Digital Humanities, which funded some of this project, and then their work with Microsoft Research Office of the Digital Humanities, we got hooked up with Andy Van Dam's Advanced Computing Visualization Computing Group at Brown University, who really helped us work through the visual processing aspects. So this was a way in which a project that started in the humanities with a kind of consideration about digital cultural heritage couldn't have been done until we really moved into collaboration with the computer scientists in the form of Andy's team at Brown. So here's what I've learned about these projects. That designing is inherently multidisciplinary, and that it is as much about social negotiations as it is about the exercise of creativity. It is a process whereby wicked problems can be meaningfully addressed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's also a space to explore new opportunities. So design that only focuses on problems to produce solutions is a kind of one-sided approach to design, because the other half is, of course, to look at creative opportunities for creating the cultures that we actually want. And in the end, I will argue that designing represents an opportunity to do things differently. So let me talk a little bit about the issue of wicked problems, which sometimes, especially in the NSF, are called grand challenges. You know, most design solutions or design approaches focus on the creation of solutions that are problems that are actually kind of well-bounded. And from the beginning, most design approaches already define the problem in terms of the solution, which is that the solution will involve technology. So in this case, the designing process is actually already has the solution in mind, and it's actually the solution driving the determination of the problem. And when the solution fails, in that sense, when a technological solution fails, it is always blamed on culture. It's always blamed on culture. The culture of the organization resisted the new technology. The culture of the work group wouldn't embrace the new technological systems, and so on. It happens all the time. In business now, they're starting to shift, right? Where culture eats strategy for lunch, arguing that from a business entrepreneurial kind of consulting effort, that if you don't take issues of culture seriously from the beginning, your strategies are not going to work, or rather they are going to be sabotaged somewhere down the line. So wicked problems, on the other hand, are defined from the beginning as social and cultural problems that have multiple explanations, multiple and interrelated causes, multiple symptoms. They require a whole range of approaches to think through and start unpacking the kind of implications of the symptoms and so on. So the design approach that's best suited to address wicked problems, and many people have argued about this, is one that begins as a multidisciplinary effort that brings people into the designing process who are not typically brought to the table. And that means the social scientists, the culturalists, who are artists as well as humanists, and not just artists who are representing the humanities, but those who have methodologies to assess and do the kind of cultural evaluation of the scene of the problem. So I want to talk a little bit about then the question of how one collaborates when you're in this kind of multidisciplinary kind of melange of people. And here's what I call it, and I talk about it as collaboration across differences. There isn't a collaboration with consensus. When you're building multidisciplinary teams, consensus is maybe an aspiration, but really what will be most present is the differences among you. There will be different terminology, different work practices, modes of publishing, meaning modes of being recognized that what you're doing is important, different definitions of what counts as creativity, different modes of engagement, the combative mode, the shoulder-to-shoulder mode, the devil's advocate mode. These are very entrenched parts of different disciplinary practices and can't be legislated out of the designing process. There are obviously different points of view. And the last point is probably, the one that sums it up. In fact, people who come to the multidisciplinary scene bring different mattering maps. They bring different ideas about what is important to work on. And part of the design effort is negotiating those mattering maps so that everybody who comes into the design scene has something at stake that matters to them that will help address the problem at hand or the opportunity at hand. So in that, I have had lots of collaborations that have gone really well, even if we got laid off. And then lots of collaborations that haven't gone very well, and those are not the ones that show up on my CV. So I'm going to now talk in reflecting on both the successes that I bring with me and the failures that are more definitive often than the successes. Here are the things that I would call the rules of engagement for multidisciplinary collaborative research, that everyone brings intellectual generosity to the process, that they are not there to one-up each other, but there to really listen and understand where people come from. Intellectual flexibility means that you're able to take on the hat of someone else and understand the perspective from their perspective on the issue, the discussion. These two next, intellectual humility and intellectual confidence, go hand in hand. Intellectual humility has to do with, and these are mostly with my students, that if someone critiques or disagrees with you, it cannot be soul-crushing. You have to stay in it. Critique is part of the whole way in which design moves forward. The other side of the coin, of course, is intellectual confidence, that regardless of where you are and how empowered you are to be there, you have to have the confidence that, in fact, you have something important to contribute. Even if you don't know Python and you don't know algorithmic design and you don't know, there are many things that you won't know, especially as a humanist, that doesn't mean you don't have something important to say. And likewise, those who don't know anything about digital cultural heritage have something to say about the way in which we approach it. And then everybody, the foundation must be intellectual reliability, that in a multidisciplinary team, this is important with students, we know this, you have to bring your A game. And there is no hiding in a projects team, right? And this is the thing we always run into with students, is somebody wants to hide. So why is multidisciplinarity important at a university? Versus like the research centers that I've been involved with and so on. And I might not be able to see this, but I think partly it's because it is the approach to engage multiple intelligences, whether this is intelligence in terms of visual thinkers and auditory thinkers and kind of text-based thinkers or tactile-based thinkers. It is a way to create deep knowledge. To know something from multiple disciplines is to know it deeply. Right? To know it from one discipline is necessary, but to know it from multiple disciplines gives you a much kind of broader and nuanced sense of the knowledge that is under creation. It is the framework for creating new knowledges across the disciplines. This is the way the disciplines will grow. The disciplines are structured to reproduce themselves. They reproduce what they already know. Multidisciplinary work is what will make the disciplines accountable to growing in new ways and to identifying the horizons of new research. And then finally, why is multidisciplinarity important for the institute, or the research university, is because this is the institutional culture that we need to grow or for the education of the next generations of scholars, of scientists, engineers, humanists, teachers. This is the world that we live in now, and this is the place, and this is the culture we must develop in the university. So in the kind of work I've done, looking at multidisciplinary research teams, again, it's hard to see, but the focus that I've done is working on, the creation of evocative artifacts, exploring different practices of knowledge production. So, we look at different ways to disseminate kind of the efforts of the research and the design. This is why I worked on a transmedia project for the last book. For me, these projects offer the opportunity to structure the exercise of the imagination, to bring people into, I totally picked the wrong color for this, and it also offers opportunities to experiment with the design of infrastructures for learning. I'm sorry, but you know what? We'll make the slides available. So this is a part that, a diagram that I published in the book that was really my kind of trying to figure out what if I could build the university of my dreams, what would I have it do to kind of start with questions of designing culture at the center? And I won't go through all this, but what I was trying to do was not to was to accommodate different elements. That there's a role for disciplinary programs, right? I'm not saying that we should do away with, and in fact, the way we already define them, humanities, social sciences, disciplinary programs provide important foundations. But out of the new work that will be done in asking new research questions through these kind of multidisciplinary teams will come new educational programs that again serve as the horizon of where we'll go next. At the center for me has always been the notion of learner-centered pedagogies, which take advantage of new network learning opportunities. And the thing that probably trips up humanists the most is my continued kind of emphasis on transformative applied research. I'm not saying that's all the kind of research that needs to go on in the humanities, but to participate in technological innovation and thinking about new technologies, humanists have to think differently about what it means to do research and what's the form that that research takes. Often it will involve technology prototyping, so new websites, new kinds of archiving, and so on. Sometimes it'll involve technologies of literacy, where we start to learn what kind of new literacies do we need to teach. For example, data visualization literacy. This is an issue we have to teach, right? Informatics literacy, this is a literacy, and that comes because we are now moving into different kinds of kind of media forms and kind of technological experiences. So if these are our ideals, learner-centered, keeping the student at the center of our efforts, our responsibility continues to be in publication and outreach, in making the connections between what's going on in the university in a local place to the universities and our professional networks, as well as our communities and the societies and the cultures in which we live. So let me just note that when I'm thinking about this kind of process of thinking about the logics of the research university, it has to be grounded somewhere. And in fact, probably is grounded in many places. It can't just exist in the networks or kind of in the ether. And, so things like fab labs and maker spaces become really important. In various times, I've been associated with humanities labs. The humanities lab, the digital humanities lab at Stanford, I was the associate director for that. I've visited and have certainly done reviews of lots of digital humanities, maker spaces, and so on. But the kind of space that is needed, I think, for this is not just the individual lab here and here. It's that you need a place that has a kind of an organizational effort to focus attention. And all those labs and spaces are very important. They're places where things get worked out. People work with things to think through ideas, and they collaborate, and they shoulder-to-shoulder work. But there is a space, whether it's physical or not, but physical, like the design center, a physical space where efforts can be coordinated. And maybe they're coordinated on a 2-year project to address a wicked problem. But while we have these aspirations to kind of the messiness of democratic process and people can just show up and so on, that in fact that work has to be infrastructured and collaboration has to be coordinated and managed. That doesn't mean it's top-down designed, but there is that kind of, like a community has to have a community manager to be effective, to again share kind of goals, understand, negotiate mattering maps, and so on. So when I look at the new design center, and its look and feel and so on, my question is, how is that space going to tell the story of your aspirations and your mission? And that's the question. And you guys are on that. That's exactly where you are. How is the literal architecture of the space going to reiterate and emphasize and communicate the multidisciplinarity that is the front and center of the mission of the new center? I haven't seen it. It hasn't been built, and I know that that's exactly what you are all kind of talking about right now. It will be a collaboration of collaborative spaces, but how does the building itself tell your story? So this is what I have on my agenda. that is a companion project. It is not the same project as what the Design Center has. It's a companion project. It's the biggest project I've had the honor and the opportunity and the privilege, in fact, to take on. There's a new school. It was started in fall of this past year, Arts, Technology, Emerging Communication at UT Dallas. It was created based on two programs that had already been in place for about 10 years, the Arts and Technology program and the Emerging Communication. Both of those programs were incubated in the School of Arts and Humanities. So they had already been working the boundary, or working the bridges between arts and humanities and the other major signature schools at Dallas, which are the School of Management, the School of Engineering, the School of Computer Science, the School of Brain Sciences. So Dallas is a very heavy engineering program. All arts and humanities is in one kind of college. So they had been incubating this. They finally kind of made the decision, the time was right, let's pull those programs out of arts and humanities and make them the anchor programs in this new college. That building is already built. It's called the Edith O'Donnell kind of Center for Arts, Technology, and Emerging Communication. So that building's been in the works for 5 years. It opened 2 years ago. So the powers that be at Dallas already had an idea that this was kind of coming down the pike. They hadn't pulled all the people together yet, but they finally did in the fall. And when they moved people in, here are some of the labs. There's a culture science lab, creative autonoma, art science, sound design, narrative systems research lab is what they call their game design, and fabrication, projection mapping, and then I bring another lab, which is my public interactives lab. So those are all the ATEC kind of labs. Those are run by faculty of appointments in ATEC. Then there are 3 labs that are engineering kind of based labs, so they're not ones that are kind of under my domain as the new dean of this project. There's their VR lab, their robotics lab, and a visual computing lab. But they also have fine arts in there, so a 4th floor that has sculptors and painters and photography and cinema makers, and a huge new Institute for Art History Research, the first one built in the country in the last 50 years. So it's a melange, again, it's a melange. It hasn't been rationalized. This is the project. There's no staff. I've got 3 staff. I've got to staff up. There's no hiring plan. Many things have to be put in place here. And I've got a bunch of people who are already on the ground doing work who need decisions right away. So that's what I start officially July 1st. Here are some of the projects I hope to incubate that are kind of building on what's there, and I want to push people. So different things that have to do with the humanities questions, the social histories, the cultural analysis, cultural analytics, media analytics, 2 big kind of things kind of drawing on kind of design and data analytics, as well as cultural issues, emotional game design. Larry Leifer at Stanford University has a long-standing program in engineering for well-being, which is just one of my most favorite programs, and I've had a chance to consult with them on projects throughout the way. Immersive cinema, which is what we might think about as our VR, the way in which we articulate VR, robot as media, computational instruments, and then finally always thinking about how do we disseminate the insights through new genres of digital scholarship. So what about publications that have their data sets embedded in the publication themselves so other people can actually run simulations? So this is the last slide to wrap it up. That why I think it's important for multidisciplinarity to do the hard work of collaborating across differences is because the work draws on the strengths of each discipline represented, of each person represented, and what it will do, it'll change the conversations, not only in the room, but in the disciplines themselves. There will be the opportunity to form new questions that are nuanced differently than they've been, and it also engages multiple perspectives that are exactly what we need to do things differently at the broadest social and cultural scale. So thank you. Okay. Thank you. 4 minutes.
So thank you. I just wanted to not only thank you personally, but you hit on so many topics that we are grappling with at NCSA as well, and I just really appreciated all of your messages. I'm going to talk to you about it a lot more. I also want to say we have a T-shirt for you which I think represents what we're trying to do to make the new NTSA along many of the themes you're talking about. So you are a proud recipient of our new T-shirt.
Oh my God, it's even red and black.
Exactly.
And the future started here.
So we have some time for some questions. I know we're perhaps a little bit late, but I'd really like to take some time for some questions. So who'd like to start?
Thank you for your talk. The vision that you articulated seemed to me to rest very much on an underlying premise of democracy and equality, in which the disciplines come to the table and they have a dialogue and a collaboration on the basis of the assumption that they are equal. But I'm wondering that, that in the abstract, that is a very attractive vision, but we know that all apparatuses of production of knowledge are really shot through with relations of power, and that leads to what gets produced and what actually happens. So given, for example, in the university, the STEM disciplines enjoy so much more institutional power and support, and in the world out there beyond the university as well, how can this vision of equality and democracy between disciplines be actualized when the humanities and the STEM or management, business, and more kind of the more powerful disciplines come to the table?
Mm-hmm. And that's when I'll refer back to my insight that designing is as much about social negotiations as it is about the expression of creativity. That the very real fact that power is differently distributed among participants who are called to be kind of engaged in these discussions, power has to be negotiated. And it has to be negotiated on both sides, right? On those who hold power, whether it's disciplinary power, knowledge power, senior power, gender power, rank power, and so on. Power has to be negotiated both by those who hold it and those who are not as empowered. And that's where the rules of engagement come in, that notion of intellectual generosity, that it requires both kind of, and multiple people to understand. And it's not about giving up power or checking your power or so on. It's about understanding how your power can serve the project and not be used to power over somebody else, and work to kind of create the conditions whereby even those who aren't empowered to speak on behalf of the engineering curriculum, so be it. That isn't the domain or the province of people who aren't experts in engineering. But how might you engage their insights on curriculum decisions or design decisions or so on? So it is social negotiations that are at the heart of what happens in a multidisciplinary group. To think that it's somehow just an objective sense of here's the problem, we've got to come up with the objective solution. It's understanding the kind of social engagement, the interactions among the people, and that has to be, it has to start with a recognition that people are literally differently enabled to be there in the kind of the scene of discussion. How that happens is not formulaic.
Question? Okay.
So you talk about irate people has creativity, and so in discussion of the creating things, you try to bring the irate people's creativity into the discussion, but the real execution or real people may have different creativity not showing in a short time, they don't realize what's the creativity of their self, and when in a short discussion, how do you inspire these people have that kind of creativity and that people have that kind of creativity into the same page, into the discussion?
Right. I mean, those are good discussions to have. I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, those are good discussions. What's the evidence of creativity in the arts? It's a performance, it's a demonstration, it's a piece of work that is recognized by other people. It's produced by a set of practices, studio-based practices, musician, and so on. So evidence of creativity makes sense and is well, that's part of the disciplinary kind of training of the artist. In engineering, creativity will come kind of and have different kinds of evidence. In the humanities, the evidence of creativity might be the framing of a question based on historical knowledge. Like, this is how it was done, in the past. How might that influence what we're doing now in the future? I mean, so exactly, it's the question of who. It's like what we talked about at Park. We called it a creative inventory. Who knows what? Who does what? Who can do what? Who brings what to the table? And it wasn't a resource. It wasn't a resource like how much money do you have or so on. It was like, what are your creative resources to bring? And so, like, what's your superpower? What's your superpower? Bring it here. And then the question is, whose superpower would you like to have? And then you start building these bridges. Like, man, I'd love to be able to know how to ask historically informed questions. Why would an engineer even know how to do that if that's not part, and that hadn't been part of their disciplinary training? I'd love to know how to process a 25 gigapixel. Why would I know that, right? So it's kind of like a creative inventory, not only about what you bring, but what manifests as creativity.
There's a question back here.
Oh, yes.
Really excited about your conversation and your talk. The question I have for you is, as I'm listening and just thinking about engineering and humanities, as part of your conversation, I didn't hear a lot about how that connects with communities that are blighted, particularly ghetto communities, and the points of access. And so when I think about that, I had 14-year-olds here from Chicago last week for a college tour. A alumni from U of I is a teacher at Brownsville Academy in DeSable High School, and they have 2 schools within the school. And we had 3 14-year-olds, young men, and I asked them the question, why are they shooting in Chicago? I keep asking the question. And each time I asked young people that question, they said 2 things that I think is very important for the Academy to hear. First is that we think and we believe that people have forgotten about us. That's number 1. Then number 2, and that was last year, and then this year when they came down last week, I asked a young man again, a 14-year-old, he had 3 of his partners with him, and I asked the question again. Chicago Tribune had a mother crying on the newspaper, and this stuff has just become so normal, and I'm so tired of it. And I said, why are people shooting? And so he said, because nobody's protecting us. And these are 14-year-olds. He said, Dr. Patterson, he said, if someone hurts my friend, right, then I have to do something about that. And I'm listening to this 14-year-old say this, and when he said, I have to do something about that. And so when I hear us have these conversations about technology and advancement, and I think about the great research in bioengineered medicine and what happens with these families that have grandmothers and uncles and people that are really dealing with real serious issues, health issues, these young folks become the purveyors and ultimately the bridge between chronic illness and health and the people that take care of their families, and them then believing in the new technologies that are emerging in bioengineered medicine and things like that. My question to you is, how will your center begin looking at how you look at the idea of the genius of the young people in these communities? How do they get access to spaces like this, to bring that to the Academy and bring that indigenous, like that superpower? How do we recognize their superpower within the context of the genius that's happening in spaces like this? Because they don't believe in the spaces like this. But when they left, there was a breakthrough because that same young man came down and said, can I have your phone number? So now I have to go to Chicago to connect with him, as well as the other kids that they have conflict with, so they'll put the pistols down. So I just want to get some conversation from you about that.
So, let me make just a couple of points. I think those are great questions for those who are working on the design of the design center. I think they're very poignant questions, and they're questions that are going on all over the place, including for the new project that I'm working on in Dallas. So those are important questions. If I take a step back and look at it from kind of the academic framework that I was laying out here, the question is exactly what we would refer to as a wicked problem. There is no single solution, and certainly not one that starts with technology. And those are the most frustrating moments, because it's not just violence, it's not just access to guns, it's poverty, it's education, it's nutrition, it's housing, it's architecture, it's weather, it's water, so that's what a wicked problem is, right? Something that is so intertwined. And the problem with wicked problems is they're so overwhelming, no one wants to even start. But that's why we often work on the smaller problems, because they're more tractable and they seem like we could do something, we could get success. And as humans, we want success, and failure to solve or address, because you don't solve wicked problems, you address them. You can't address them if you don't have a good analysis. And that's where the multidisciplinary teams of a different sort, the social scientists, the policy, the urbanists, the nutritionists, the environmental scientists, the developmental psychologists, the race, the experts on race development, race relations, racial communities. I mean, there may be a different group of multidisciplinary participants to be addressing that kind of a problem where the technologists are not necessarily the ones who bring something important to that discussion. Maybe down the road, some sort of, safety button. If I'm getting angry, I could press something that gets an intervention. I mean, there may be something like that. It's certainly possible, but that's exactly a question, and a question that is not only relevant to the community, but it's certainly relevant to the university, because we are members of a community. We are affected by the deaths, the violence. And the question, I think, and I know this is, we were talking last night about the Fab Lab that is distributed throughout the community. So you already have a kind of track record of engaging community members of all stripes, under the guise of education or outreach after school. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I was going to ask a question.
Oh, okay. Yes,
Sure.
of course.
So just to riff off of what Dr. P was starting. So I liked your slide that had the layout of all the different, here's the framework, right? And at the bottom we have publications and outreach. And I spent some time in the library school here, and they actually some of the people that influenced me there taught me that outreach is not always the best word, because it kind of gets we're going to do all this research here in this great mighty university, and then we're going to tell everybody about what we're doing, and that's sort of the end of it. And I'm in informatics, the Illinois Informatics Institute, and I'm really excited about the idea of not just interdisciplinarity in terms of disciplines within the university, but also what are the ideas that are out in our communities that we can learn from, and then also that might include public engagement with corporations as well. What are the ideas that are happening in industry? And so that was sort of my question. Is in that framework, we're trying to get everybody here to talk to each other. Yeah. Should part of that, or could part of that model include getting us to talk to the greater, larger community as a land grant institution to tackle problems like what Dr. P is talking about?
Right, and talking with them and not at them, right? I mean, that's your point about we're not the center of knowledge, dispensing wisdom onto the unwashed, I think I would change, that was built, I built that slide in 2009, so it's really kind of old and long in the tooth at this point. I would probably change it now, influenced by, the scene in New York. We talk about public engagement and that there are multiple publics, and how one engages members of multiple publics. There's the public that I participate in my school, there's a public of the university, the publics just multiply, overlap, and so on. How do you engage multiple publics, different publics for different reasons? It resonates with some things in participatory design, but needs to be rethought about participatory design, that it's not just thinking you're going to bring members of the community to the design table and it gets back to the power issue, that somehow they're going to have an equal kind of, and it's how you manage and think about stakeholders. And, there are many nuances to that again, aren't formulaic. We can say we need to bring different and diverse stakeholders, and that is useful in some design projects, but engaging in conversations might be an anthropological problem or an anthropological project, not a design project.
Well, let's see. Do people mind if we go on for a few more minutes? If you shake your head, yes means we'll stay. Okay, good.
Or if you need to leave. People are leaving, so I won't take an offense at this point.
I was really interested in the way that you were connecting architecture with a narrative. And I think one of the questions that arises for me with that is that it seems like the narrative oftentimes is that we're starting from a disciplinary place and moving to an interdisciplinary place, or perhaps that we're starting from thinking and moving to doing, and you ended with doing. And I'm kind of want to question what that narrative might look like if we're not starting from a disciplinary place, if we're starting with doing and finding ways of thinking from that activity. And in particular, I'm really interested in ways that the Design Center can facilitate mentoring to a novice who's not already part of a disciplinary practice. How do they jump into this, what I'm perhaps describing as a loop, theory and practice operating in a loop? Where's the entry point for a novice?
Well, I don't know the conversations that have preceded the thinking on the Design Center, so I don't know where they started thinking or doing, but I'm going to just answer the last part of this, or address the last part of this. Mimi Ito has done some amazing work about how young people learn to use new technologies. And so I just totally riff off of a couple of her insights. She's like, here's what happens. This is how they do it. She's a longitudinal ethnographer. And she's like, they start by hanging out. And then they move to messing around, and then they geek out. So that there is a process why you got to make the space, they'll hang out. And that's why the building has to tell the story. Come in, it's got to be, there's a cafe in the new design, there's comfort here, hang out, it's beautiful, it's light. So hang out. When you hang out, what next will happen will be mess around, put something up on the whiteboards that are public, or bring your team or your project team here to, do your brainstorming, just messing around. And then you can see how that might open up the eyes to moving into a lab where you're messing around with the stuff that's laying around. So that's the Fab Lab model, right? They hang around, hacker spaces maybe.
Lots of hacker spaces.
Yeah. They hang around, they start messing around, and next thing you know, they're hooked on something. What is needed to flip that switch is exactly the process of education and pedagogy. Pedagogy is our set of tools to flip the switch. And it's mentoring, it's learner-centered, it's project-based learning, it's flipped the classroom. That's what we've been developing, are pedagogical tools, and the point of a pedagogy is to flip that switch.
One more question.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Maybe
your
two.
talk.
There's so many hands up. Sorry. Go ahead.
I have one comment and then one question. As somebody who I put together interdisciplinary proposals and bring a team of people together, I think part of the design should be that the time has to be a main factor in here, because for these interdisciplinary projects, you need that time to let them get comfortable with each other, make sense of the project, and trust each other. And that is an added factor to that design, and that's something that we need to actually keep that in mind. My question is, what are some of the obstacles you think prevents people from participating in these interdisciplinary projects? And because I think to whoever I talk to, they understand that this is good, beneficial, but what is it that is stopping them from participating in those things?
A sense of ownership of the territory. I'm writing an article called A Lab of One's Own, and if you're a feminist in the room, you'll know that that's a riff on Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, that a lot of the pipeline efforts for increasing women in STEM have faltered because they're moving into a space that they know they don't own, and that they're still there as kind of invitees. So I will tell you that, right? So, because what are they doing? They're walking into labs that have no senior female researchers. It's all that kind of intangible stuff that says you're not the person who owns the territory. You will never be the person because there aren't your senior female role models and so on. So I think the ownership, presuming the ownership of a territory, is probably the critical thing, because then you're always being invited into somebody else's party, and you're not the host.
Yeah, there seem to be burning questions on that side. So go ahead. Let's make sure we get over to that side a little bit. And But then we'll have to wrap it up.
So I've seen a lot of efforts being made to bridge the gap between, say, business and technologies and the humanities and fine arts. But what about business and humanities? So I guess I'm wondering what universities and or education in general could do to connect business, technologies, and humanities. Because from my perspective as a business student, I don't think I've seen the atmosphere of, say, business students interested in humanities, and I think that's a huge problem, and it's been bothering me for 4 years. So yeah.
Boy, that would be a whole nother talk, and I'm sure we don't have time.
Donna was just warning me that in order to get you to your next thing, we're going to have to also move quickly.
So let me just respond very quickly that there are some topics that I think could bridge those interests, and they're topics that are not, I don't know if they're taught in this business school. I can't remember. But things like managing media campaigns for nonprofit organizations, social entrepreneurship, cultural entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship in the service of social good. I mean, there are ways that cultural heritage management. I mean, there are ways in which we're not just talking about advocating, poverty for those who are in business, kind of to take on a humanities topic, but there are new permutations about what people with business backgrounds want to do and what skill sets they have that are going to contribute to maybe other kinds of entities than just for-profit kind of industries or businesses. So I know we have to leave. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so
Yes.
much, Anne. Thank you.